It started with a phone call I never expected, and a silence I can still feel in my bones. If you're a parent, this will hit you harder than you're ready for. If you're married, it'll make you question how well you really know the person sleeping next to you. And if you believe in trust, memory, and healing, this story is going to challenge everything you thought was safe. My wife took our daughter to what she called a healing retreat, just for the weekend. No red flags. Just one of those nature-based self-care camps you see all over Instagram. But when they came home, my wife looked haunted, and our daughter had scars. Real, physical scars on her back and shoulders. She wouldn't speak. And when she finally did, she said she didn't remember anything. Nothing. Not the retreat. Not the people. Not even her mom. And I swear to you, this isn't one of those clickbait stories. You're going to get the answer. That's a promise. What happened to my little girl was real. And it's something no parent should ever have to piece together from broken memories, missing phone records, and a terrifying silence from the one person I thought I could trust the most, my wife. Now, before you jump to conclusions, let me ask you this. What would you do if your child came home injured, mentally foggy, and the only adult who was with them claims it was all part of the healing? Would you question her? Would you confront her? Would you call the police? Or would you do what I did, start digging? Quietly, carefully, because deep down I knew something was wrong. And I knew that if I pressed too hard too soon, I might lose the only chance I had to find out what really happened. So, I'm inviting you into this nightmare with me. Not because I want sympathy, but because the truth is buried in layers of lies, and it's only when someone else, like you, sees the full picture that the edges start to sharpen. This story is complicated. It's psychological. And it's dangerous. But if you stick with me, piece by piece, I'm going to show you what I discovered. I'll take you through the retreat, the interviews, the hidden files, and the moment I realized this wasn't just about healing. It was about control, about indoctrination, and possibly about something even darker. And listen, I'm not going to waste your time with overproduced drama or empty theories. I'm going to give you the raw, disturbing truth, the kind you find when you peel back the calm face of a family and see what's crawling underneath. This video isn't just a story, it's a real-time unraveling of a life that looked perfect from the outside. And if you think this can't happen to you, think again. Because what we found out, what we're still finding out, might be happening to other families right now. Families who think their loved ones are attending harmless wellness retreats, only to come back with blank stares and a hole in their memory where something traumatic once lived. So let me back you up. I'm a father. My daughter, Ellie, is 8 years old, smart, sensitive, the kind of kid who feels things deeply. And my wife, Leah, she's always been into holistic healing. Yoga, energy cleansing, that sort of thing. I didn't mind it. We balanced each other out. I work in logistics, supply chains, numbers, deadlines. She believed in energy fields and moon phases. And somehow it worked until now. When she told me she wanted to take Ellie to a weekend mother-daughter retreat in the mountains of Oregon, I said sure. Why not? Leah said it was about cleansing emotional weight, about teaching kids to self-soothe spiritually. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? We were a team. She was a loving mother. I had no reason to think she'd put our child in danger. But the second they came back, everything changed. My daughter didn't run up to me like she always did. She stared at me like I was a stranger. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile. And Leah, God, Leah, she wouldn't meet my eyes. She said it was an intense weekend, that Ellie needed time to process. But when I asked what they did there, she gave me vague, recycled words, grounding, energy release, rebirth. That's when I saw the marks on Ellie's back. Raised, red, circular, like burns or pressure points. She said she didn't remember how she got them. And I'm telling you right now, this is the moment you'll want to pause the video. But don't. Because this isn't fiction. This is what really happened. And it only gets worse from here. I started looking into the retreat, the so-called Sacred Renewal Collective. No website. No phone number. Just a few social media posts, all with heavily filtered photos of women in white linen holding hands in camelot forests. It didn't look dangerous. It looked like every other wellness retreat out there. But the more I searched, the more the story fractured. I found a forum post from someone claiming the group wasn't what it seemed. I found a report, buried deep, about a different mother and daughter who attended a similar retreat last year and came home with behavioral changes. And when I confronted Leah about it, she didn't react with fear or regret. She reacted with calm detachment. "Ellie needed this," she said. "You wouldn't understand." Wouldn't understand what? That's the question that kept me up for nights after. That's the question that made me check our daughter's body every time she took a shower. That's the question that led me to a locked journal in Leah's closet, pages filled with scribbled symbols and phrases in a language I didn't recognize. That's the question that made me follow Leah one night when she said she was going to a women's circle. She wasn't. She drove to a remote farmhouse 30 miles out, where I watched her disappear into the woods with 2 other women, each carrying what looked like small bundles wrapped in cloth. When she came back hours later, she had dirt under her fingernails. She didn't know I'd followed her. And if you think this is already too much, just wait. Because what I discovered next, with the help of a private investigator, blew the whole thing wide open. And no, I'm not exaggerating. The retreat wasn't just a wellness group. It was part of something much larger. A network. A system built to look harmless, even empowering. But underneath, it was something else entirely. And the moment I realized what Ellie had been exposed to, what Leah had willingly participated in, I knew I couldn't stay quiet. I couldn't pretend everything was normal. I had to act, even if it meant tearing our family apart, even if it meant putting everything at risk, even if it meant involving the police. Which I did. And that's when things got even darker. So if you're here to find out what really happened, why Ellie came home with no memory, why my wife is no longer the woman I married, and what was buried deep in those woods, I'm going to show you. I'm going to take you there, step by step. But I need you to stay with me, all the way through. Because the truth isn't just shocking, it's contagious. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it might just open your eyes to something you've overlooked in your own life. A friend, a partner, a harmless retreat someone close to you is attending. The signs are there. We just don't recognize them until it's too late. So stay tuned, because in the next section, I'm going to take you inside the retreat itself. I found footage. I found a whistleblower. And I found something in our daughter's backpack that changed everything. What was inside? I kept that backpack in the corner of our bedroom for 2 days before I had the nerve to go through it. Something about it felt too personal, too sacred, like I'd be violating Ellie's mind just by unzipping it. But every time I looked at her, curled up on the couch in that blank, heavy silence, I knew I had no choice. Leah wouldn't answer my questions. Ellie couldn't. And the backpack, it was the only silent witness left in this unraveling story. When I finally opened it, it didn't feel like I was just searching through a child's belongings. It felt like I was opening a door that someone desperately wanted to keep shut. Inside were the usual things: her stuffed rabbit, a notebook from school, a small lavender sachet that Leah always tucked into Ellie's bags to calm the nervous system. But then I found a folded piece of cloth, soft, white, and stained with what looked like wax. Or maybe something else. Underneath it, hidden inside a zipper pocket, was a stone. Smooth, polished, carved with a symbol that sent a cold pulse straight through my chest. It looked ancient, primitive. And I knew, without being able to explain how, that my daughter had not picked this up by accident. Over the next few days, I started watching everything more closely. Leah's mood swings, her sudden moments of deep stillness, like she was listening to something no one else could hear. Ellie's sleepwalking, the way she'd stand at the end of our bed at night, whispering things I couldn't understand. I began recording audio while she slept, not because I wanted to invade her privacy, but because I needed some kind of clue, some kind of pattern. And what I heard on those recordings shook me to my core. Words in a language I didn't recognize. Patterns, rhythmic, almost like chants. A few times, I swore I heard Leah's voice, even though she was asleep in the same bed beside me. I started to wonder if this retreat hadn't just broken something in our daughter, but had planted something new. Something growing. You might think I sound paranoid. And maybe I was. But when your family starts behaving like strangers overnight, and your questions are met with soft smiles or complete denial, paranoia stops feeling irrational. It feels like your only defense. I tried to talk to Leah again, asked her directly what had happened, why Ellie didn't remember anything, why she had marks on her body. But Leah only responded with a tired smile and a phrase I'd come to dread. "She's healing, you're just not open enough to see it." That's when I noticed the bracelet. A woven band around Leah's wrist with tiny bone-like beads carved in the same shape as the stone from Ellie's backpack. It hadn't been there before the retreat. I asked where it came from, and she brushed me off, said it was a gift from the circle. When I reached for it, she pulled her arm away, her eyes flashing for just a second with something that didn't feel like her at all. That 1 second convinced me more than anything else that whatever this retreat had been, it hadn't just changed our daughter. It had changed my wife. I reached out to the only other parent I could find who had posted about the Sacred Renewal Collective. Her name was Camille, and her daughter, Lila, had attended a retreat 6 months prior. Camille told me she'd been sworn to secrecy by the group, warned that speaking out would disrupt her daughter's spiritual recalibration. But she broke. She told me her daughter had experienced similar symptoms: memory loss, emotional withdrawal, nightmares. And she said something else I can't forget. They never told us what they did at night. The kids were taken into the woods with the elder women. They called it the cocoon phase. When Lila came back, she was different. She knew things she shouldn't know. Camille had tried to contact the retreat leaders after that, but their website disappeared. The phone numbers went dark, and other parents who'd been involved stopped responding altogether. She tried to go back to the location, but the building had been cleared out. Nothing remained. The more I looked into it, the more I started to feel the shape of something bigger, like standing in the dark, brushing your hand against something enormous you can't quite name. I checked Leah's browser history. Most of it had been wiped clean. But I found traces, searches for things like ancestral healing through pain, liminal energy practices, and one that chilled me: how to anchor memory in spiritual containers. These weren't things you Google after a weekend of yoga and forest bathing. These were rituals, practices, and maybe indoctrination. The tension in our home grew thicker by the hour. Leah started locking the bedroom door when she meditated. She began lighting bundles of herbs that didn't smell like anything I recognized. Ellie kept drawing symbols in her notebooks: spirals, eyes, what looked like ritual circles. And every time I asked about them, she'd blink like she was waking from a dream and say, "I don't know. They just come to me." At this point, I didn't know who to trust. Not even myself. I'd find myself staring at the backyard late into the night, convinced I was hearing whispers in the wind. A few times, I even started to think maybe Leah was right. Maybe I wasn't open enough. Maybe I was resisting something that was meant to transform us. But then I'd look at Ellie's drawings, hear her chanting in her sleep, or catch Leah humming a melody I'd never heard but that made my skin crawl, and I'd snap back into myself. This wasn't healing. This was something else. Something that wore the mask of wellness but reeked of manipulation, of trauma. Then something happened that took this from disturbing to terrifying. Our neighbor, Joanne, a sweet retired schoolteacher who'd known us for years, came to our door one morning with a strange look on her face. She asked if we were okay. When I said we were fine, she hesitated, then asked if we'd had people over the past few nights. I said no. She looked at me and said, "I saw Leah in the backyard at 3 a.m. 2 nights in a row. She was with your daughter. They were standing in a circle of candles. And Ellie was crying." My blood went cold. I thanked her, closed the door, and went straight to the backyard. I didn't find any candles, but I did find melted wax in the grass, footprints leading to the treeline, and a patch of disturbed earth under the oak tree near the fence. I dug it up with my hands. Just a few inches down, I found another stone, like the one in Ellie's backpack. But this one had a crack through the center, and something dark had seeped into the lines. I couldn't pretend anymore. I knew I had to act. But here's where things start getting strange. When I tried to report all this, Ellie's memory loss, the retreat, the scars. The officer I spoke to looked unconvinced. Lots of families try experimental healing retreats, he said. It's not illegal to be weird. I asked about child endangerment, ritual abuse, mental manipulation, but without concrete evidence, I was told there was nothing they could do. That's when I contacted a private investigator. His name was Jared, and he dealt with fringe groups before, cults, underground movements, esoteric circles that operated in the gray spaces of the law. After I showed him the stone and the footage I'd gathered from our backyard cameras, he agreed something was off. This isn't a typical wellness scam, he said. These people believe what they're doing is real. That's what makes it dangerous. And here's where you need to start paying close attention. Because this is where the trail starts twisting, where suspects start appearing, and nothing is quite what it seems. Jared uncovered something about Leah's past that she never told me. Before we met, she'd been involved in another retreat circle in Arizona, one that disbanded after a participant died during a rebirth ceremony in the desert. No charges were filed, but the group was quietly blacklisted from several spiritual organizations. Leah's name was on the participant list. I confronted her about it. She didn't deny it. She just said, "That's how I found the path. Sometimes death opens the door." I felt like I was married to a stranger. But the more I tried to untangle her from this group, the more I began to wonder, what if she wasn't the victim or the pawn? What if she was a willing part of it all along? And if that's true, what does that mean for Ellie? What had my wife brought our daughter into, and why was she suddenly so determined to bring her back? Because the retreat hadn't ended. It was just beginning. The morning after I confronted Leah about her past in Arizona, everything in the house felt off. Not just quiet, but intentionally still, like the air itself was holding its breath. Leah wasn't in the bedroom when I woke up. Ellie's bed was neatly made, but she was gone too. I tried calling Leah's phone, but it rang once before cutting off. I told myself not to panic, told myself it was probably just a morning errand or a walk to calm things down. But then I went to the hallway closet, the place where I'd hidden the stone I found under the oak tree. It was gone. So was the audio recorder I'd been using to capture Ellie's sleep talk. Not misplaced. Not accidentally moved. Gone. The drawer where I kept my backup files had been cleared out. My laptop had been wiped. Every search I'd done about the sacred Renewal Collective, every screenshot, every strange photograph or whisper of a name, gone without a trace. And that was when it hit me. Someone knew I was looking too closely. And they wanted me blind. The knock came around noon. A man, mid-40s, clean-cut, too calm. He said his name was Micah, and that he was a counselor associated with the retreat. I never told anyone I'd been researching it. Definitely not that I'd hired an investigator. He smiled like he already knew. "I understand you have concerns about what your daughter experienced," he said, his tone careful and rehearsed. "We just want to support your family in transitioning peacefully." I asked where Leah and Ellie were. He didn't answer. He just handed me a plain, white envelope. Inside was a single photo. Ellie, smiling faintly, standing in a circle of women in linen robes, arms raised toward the sky. It was daytime, in the woods, and she looked calm, but distant. Blank. Like she wasn't really there. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "She is safer than you know. Stop asking questions." By the time I looked up, Micah was already walking down the driveway, his shoes silent on the pavement, disappearing into a gray Honda I didn't recognize. That was the first time I genuinely felt afraid for my life. Not just for my daughter's mind, but for my own survival. I called Jared, my investigator, and told him everything. He told me to pack a bag and leave the house immediately. He said once these kinds of groups feel threatened, they don't just retreat, they escalate. But I couldn't just run. My daughter was out there somewhere, and my wife, the woman I once promised to protect, was part of whatever this was. I needed answers. Jared agreed to meet me in person, said he had new information that couldn't be shared over the phone. We arranged to meet that evening in a small diner just off the freeway. I waited at the corner booth, heart racing, watching every car that pulled into the lot. Jared never showed. Instead, a young woman walked in, maybe late 20s, blonde hair tied back, pale, almost shaking. She sat across from me without asking and whispered, "You don't know what you're dealing with." I asked if she was part of the collective. She said no, but her sister was. She claimed she'd escaped the group after witnessing what she called a memory intervention ritual performed on a child not much older than Ellie. "It's not just therapy," she said, her voice trembling. "They believe trauma creates spiritual openness. They try to break the children's minds to make them more receptive." She gave me a flash drive before she left, said it contained screenshots from a private group chat, recordings from old sessions, names. But when I got home and plugged it in, the drive was corrupted. Every file unreadable, like it had been erased before I even touched it. Then came the email. From an anonymous sender, no subject line, just one line of text. He was warned. Attached was a grainy photo of Jared's car, crashed off a mountain road, paramedics in the background, yellow tape fluttering in the wind. The news report later called it a freak accident, brake failure. But I didn't believe it. Not for a second. Jared had told me he checked his car every week, and he was one of the most careful men I'd ever met. Now he was gone, and with him, everything he'd uncovered. For days, I heard nothing from Leah or Ellie. Every time I tried calling, I was sent straight to voicemail. I filed a missing person report, but the officer assigned to the case was dismissive, told me it was probably just a family dispute and that mothers had the right to take their kids on extended trips. He suggested I stop pushing it, said things tend to resolve on their own. That phrase stuck with me. Tend to resolve on their own. As if he knew more than he was letting on. As if he'd had this conversation before. And then I got a letter. No return address. Postmarked from a small town in Northern California. Inside was a single page, handwritten, in Leah's script. But the message wasn't from her. It said, "You made vows. You promised to protect. She is fulfilling hers now. Let her go. You are the anchor." The words didn't make sense. Or maybe they did, in a terrifying way. Like she was trying to say that I was the one holding Ellie back, like they believed Ellie needed to be broken free for me to reach some higher purpose. And that's when I remembered the journal I found in Leah's closet weeks ago, the one filled with symbols and unreadable phrases. I had scanned a few pages before it disappeared. I pulled up the backup files from my cloud, hoping something might make sense. And then I saw it. Buried between pages of ritual diagrams and chants, one phrase written over and over again in different inks, different moods, like a mantra she couldn't stop repeating. Only the bloodline can complete the circle. I stared at it for a long time, because in that moment, everything shifted. This wasn't just about Ellie. This wasn't just about healing or memory or trauma. This was about family, about lineage, about something Leah believed had to be fulfilled through Ellie, and maybe even through me. But how deep did this belief go? How long had it been festering beneath the surface of our marriage? And if Leah believed she was doing something sacred, something inevitable, what was she willing to sacrifice? Because as I closed the file and stood in the empty kitchen, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. One word. No punctuation. Brother. And that's when I remembered something Leah once told me early in our marriage. Something I'd laughed off back then. "My family doesn't talk much about my brother," she'd said. "He disappeared when I was little. But they always said he'd return when the time was right. Until that moment, I thought he was dead. But now, I wasn't sure if he'd been missing or waiting. And if he was part of this, then I wasn't just dealing with a cult. I was part of something much older. And much, much darker." The next morning, before the sun had even cleared the trees beyond our backyard, I got a call from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. My sister, Rachel. We'd grown distant after our father passed, not from any single argument, just time and different paths pulling us apart. She'd always been skeptical, guarded, didn't put much faith in people or promises. So when she called, her voice sharp and shaking, I knew something was wrong. "Did you send someone my house?" she asked, without even a hello. I told her no, asked what she meant. She hesitated for a long time, then said she'd found a letter on her windshield that morning. No envelope, just tucked beneath the wiper blade in the pouring rain. It was handwritten, just like the one I'd received, but hers had only one line. Your niece is becoming. Protect the blood, or forfeit the bond. She hadn't even known Ellie was missing. I hadn't told anyone yet. I'd been trying to keep things quiet until I could prove something. Rachel was never the emotional type, but I could hear the panic behind her words, like her world had tilted and she didn't know which direction was safe anymore. I asked her to scan the note and send it to me. When I saw the handwriting, my heart sank. It was the same script I'd seen in Leah's journal, the same symbols etched into the stones I'd found, the same looping, ritualistic curls that looked more like incantations than letters. Something about it felt rehearsed, ancient, like a language meant to bypass logic and go straight for the soul. Rachel and I hadn't spoken in almost 3 years, yet now she was being dragged into this, and not just passively. Someone had gone out of their way to let her know she was part of this too. It was no longer just my family in the crosshairs. This was spreading. I told her to stay inside, not to answer any calls from unknown numbers, and to keep the letter locked away until I could get there. But before I could even pack a bag, my phone pinged again. Another message, no number, just black text on a gray screen. She's not yours alone. The blood sings in more than one. That was when I remembered something Leah had told me a long time ago, during one of our early, wine-heavy conversations. We'd been talking about family trees and ancestry sites, laughing at how people paid to find out they were 2% Viking. But she'd grown quiet, thoughtful. I think blood remembers things we don't, she'd said, tracing her finger along the rim of her glass. Sometimes it calls to others, even if they don't know why. Back then, it had sounded poetic. Now it felt like a warning I hadn't understood in time. I drove to Rachel's house that afternoon, taking back roads, checking my mirrors constantly. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe someone to tail me, maybe another cryptic message taped to my windshield at a rest stop. But the drive was uneventful, which somehow made the anxiety worse. When I got to Rachel's place, she met me at the door looking like she hadn't slept. Her eyes were bloodshot, her movements jittery, like she kept expecting something to burst through the window. I barely made it through the front door before she pulled me to the kitchen table and slid a second note across to me, one she hadn't mentioned over the phone. She'd found it tucked into a photo album in her attic that morning. Same paper. Same handwriting. This one was even more direct. The offering requires acknowledgement. She is the first, but not the last. It didn't make sense. Rachel had no children. No husband. She'd lived alone for over a decade. But the note made it sound like someone believed she had a role to play in whatever this was. Something tied to Ellie, and maybe something much older, buried deeper in our shared bloodline than either of us had realized. And that was when Rachel told me something that knocked the wind out of me. You remember Grandma Grace? She asked, her voice low, like she wasn't sure she wanted to say it out loud. I nodded, vaguely. She died when I was young. I remembered her as quiet, distant, always burning strange herbs and whispering to herself during thunderstorms. I found a box of her things in the attic years ago, Rachel continued. I never told anyone. It was full of symbols, old photographs, letters, some of them in the same handwriting as those notes. And there was a journal, pages and pages of dreams about someone she called the Hollow Child. She said she was trying to stop the return, but she never explained what that meant. Suddenly, this wasn't just about Leah or Ellie or the retreat. This wasn't a one-off incident. This was something generational, something that had been circling our family for decades, maybe longer. My wife hadn't introduced something new into our lives. She tapped into something that had already been there, something festering in the blood and passed down like an invisible scar. And now Ellie was at the center of it. Not because she'd been chosen, but because she was born into it. And yet, just when it felt like the pieces were starting to fall into place, they scattered again. That night, I got an email from a burner account, no subject, just an attachment titled Asterisk, Truth and Air, M4A. Asterisk. I played it through headphones while Rachel tried to get some sleep upstairs. The audio was distorted, but the voice was unmistakable. It was Ellie. She was speaking slowly, like she was reciting something from memory, her voice flat and strange. He is not the vessel. He is the echo. The blood does not belong to him. And then a pause, followed by another voice, softer, older, almost maternal. He still believes she came back broken. But she came back whole. It is he who must be emptied. I ripped the headphones off, heart hammering, unsure what the hell I had just heard. Was this a recording from the retreat? Was it staged? Or was this Ellie now, changed, indoctrinated, echoing back the beliefs of the people who had taken her? And then I saw it, right there on my laptop screen. A second attachment had appeared. A photo, taken just hours earlier. Ellie, standing at the edge of a river, smiling faintly. And beside her, a woman I didn't recognize, tall, pale, draped in the same white linen as the others. But this time, her face wasn't obscured by shadows or blurs like the images before. She looked just like my grandmother. Only she died 30 years ago. The next 48 hours blurred into something I can only describe as a waking fever dream, disjointed, heavy, laced with panic I couldn't swallow down no matter how many times I tried to convince myself this was all some warped misunderstanding. I didn't sleep. Neither did Rachel. Every sound outside her house sent us peeking through blinds. A car slowing down. A branch snapping. The low, constant hum of silence that felt too still. But what truly tipped everything was the night. I stepped outside to get some air just 10 feet from the front door, standing under the porch light with a mug of coffee gone cold. I'd barely taken 2 breaths when I noticed it. A figure parked across the street, inside a black SUV with tinted windows, engine off, lights out, just there, watching. I couldn't see the driver's face, but I felt their stare like heat. It wasn't the kind of look that's curious or cautious. It was calculating. And when I stepped off the porch, the engine turned over without a sound and the SUV pulled away, vanishing into the suburban dark like it had never been there at all. I stood in the driveway for nearly 10 minutes after, shaking, trying to decide if I was losing my mind or if I had just been marked. The worst part? I couldn't even call the police. What would I say? That someone might be watching me because I've been digging into a spiritual retreat that may or may not be a generational cult. That my daughter's voice was used in a bizarre chant sent from a burner account? That my dead grandmother just photobombed a riverside mystery photo like a ghost with unfinished business? The words wouldn't just sound crazy, they would be crazy. And maybe that's the point. Maybe whoever these people were, whatever Leah had become a part of, they were counting on me sounding unhinged. They were counting on me being disbelieved, dismissed, pushed into a corner where I couldn't fight back. But paranoia only feeds itself. I started rechecking every lock in Rachel's house 4 times an hour. We blocked off the windows, shut off every smart device, dismantled the Alexa Rachel barely even used. I pulled the batteries out of our phones and started using an old prepaid one just for contact between us. But it didn't matter. The following morning, Rachel was gone. No note. No sign of struggle. No signs of forced entry. Just her bed, unmade, coffee mug still warm on the table, and her house keys left on the counter beside the old family photo she'd pulled out the night before. The one of all of us as kids at Lake Crescent, our parents standing behind us smiling, our grandmother in the back, face partly turned. I stared at that photo for hours, hoping for something I'd missed, some clue, some detail that would suddenly crack this thing wide open, but all I could see was the slow corrosion of everything I thought I understood. And the most painful truth of all? I hadn't just lost my daughter and my wife. I'd now lost the only person left who believed me. The emptiness in Rachel's house was unbearable. I couldn't stay there. I drove for hours, aimlessly, through back roads and small towns I didn't know, avoiding freeways, watching for black SUVs in my mirror. I stopped at a cheap roadside motel in Nevada, the kind with flickering neon signs and a night clerk who didn't ask questions. I needed distance. Space to think. To figure out if I was chasing ghosts or being chased by them. But even in that faded room with its musty curtains and yellowed lampshade, I couldn't escape the dread that had rooted itself inside me. I kept seeing Ellie's face. That faint, serene smile from the photo. The same expression Leah wore when she said I wouldn't understand. That same unsettling calm I'd seen once before, in a video Jared had shown me, long before he died. I still had access to a few of his encrypted files, things he'd saved to the cloud in case something happened. I pulled up the last file he sent, a blurred surveillance video taken from a hidden trail cam near the retreat property. It was time-stamped 3 months before Leah ever told me about it. The footage was grainy, but just clear enough to make out 2 figures leading a child through the trees. Not dragging, not coercing, just walking slowly, ritualistically. The child wore a linen robe, barefoot, the same kind of spiral symbol drawn in charcoal across her back. I watched it over and over, feeling that same cold pulse I'd felt when I found the first stone buried in our yard. What were they preparing her for? I needed answers, but every lead now came with risk. I couldn't trust strangers. I couldn't go to the authorities. And the people I'd once loved, Leah, Rachel, even my daughter, were now part of something I couldn't see the full shape of. I felt like I was spiraling in a story that was being written around me, without me, and despite me. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I received a package. No return address, just left at the motel front desk with my name scribbled on the side. Inside was an old photo album. Familiar. Worn. It was the same one from Rachel's attic, the one she said had been tucked away for decades. But this version, it had new photos. Photos that weren't there before. There was one of me, taken just a few nights ago, standing on the motel balcony, drinking coffee, looking out into the dark. Someone had been following me, watching, documenting. But why? And what were they waiting for? I flipped through the rest of the album with shaking hands. Page after page of children dressed in ceremonial garb. Forest gatherings. Candles in glass jars lining the dirt. Faces hidden. Except for one. Near the back. A candid photo of a young boy, maybe 8 years old, crying in the middle of a clearing surrounded by women. His eyes locked on the camera. And in the background, just behind him, half shrouded in shadow, was a face I recognized instantly. It was mine, only I have no memory of ever being there. I stared at the photo until my vision blurred, blinking against the rising pressure behind my eyes, desperate to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't a resemblance, it was me. Same jawline, same scar on the eyebrow from when I fell off my bike at age 9, same awkward tilt of the head I've seen in every photo taken of me since. Only this one. This image of a terrified child in the center of a ritual circle was dated 19 years before I was born. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, a manipulated image, a cruel fabrication. But as I looked deeper into the photo, into the worn edges and faded ink, I realized the paper wasn't new. The album was old, brittle with time. These weren't digital edits. These were archival. Somehow, impossibly, my face, my childhood face, was part of something long before I ever existed. I flipped the photo over, my hands trembling so hard I almost tore it, and found a name written on the back in neat, old-fashioned script. Samuel. The failed vessel. That name hit me like a punch to the chest. Not because it was unfamiliar, but because it was what my mother had wanted to name me before I was born. Samuel. A name my father had vetoed last minute in the delivery room, saying it sounded too heavy, too religious. I had only heard the story once, in passing, years ago. There's no way anyone outside of my immediate family could have known. And yet, here it was, etched in ink on a decades-old photo of a boy who looked exactly like me, caught in a moment of desperation in a place I had no memory of ever being. My brain started fracturing into pieces of timelines, fragmented possibilities. Had my memory been tampered with? Was this some long-buried trauma I'd blocked out? Or was something far stranger happening here? Something beyond linear time and inherited trauma? Could they have replicated my image? Used some kind of manipulation to insert me symbolically into this nightmare? I needed answers, and I didn't care anymore if they came with danger. So I did the one thing I'd sworn not to. I called Leah. Her number went straight to voicemail, just like before. But this time I didn't hang up. I left a message. I told her what I'd found. I told her about the photo. And I told her I wasn't running anymore. I said her silence wasn't going to protect her. That if she truly loved Ellie, she'd meet me and explain what the hell was going on. I didn't expect a response. But 30 minutes later, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I answered, and for a few seconds there was just static. Then her voice, quiet, flat, but unmistakably hers. "You weren't supposed to remember," she said. "We buried that part of you for a reason." I didn't know how to respond. My thoughts weren't connecting, like my brain was trying to reroute through too many emotions at once: fear, confusion, anger, betrayal. She continued, calm and deliberate. "You think you're outside this, but you were the first. Before Ellie. Before any of them. You just weren't strong enough to carry it. That's why they let you forget. But she's different. She can complete it." I demanded to know who they were, what she meant by complete, what exactly had been done to me, but Leah didn't answer. Instead, she said something that chilled every bone in my body. "Your bloodline has always been part of the offering. You were spared. She won't be." The line went dead. I sat in the dark, motel light flickering overhead, completely unmoored. Nothing I had believed up to that moment was solid anymore. My childhood, my marriage, even my identity, it all felt like it had been shaped by invisible hands I'd never seen. I started thinking about all the strange memories from when I was a kid, how I used to wake up screaming, convinced I'd been in the woods, surrounded by women with silver eyes. How I'd draw spirals in my notebooks, not knowing where I'd seen them. How my mother always flinched when she heard the word retreat, like it triggered something primal in her she refused to name. I always thought those were just quirks. Childhood nightmares. But what if they weren't dreams? What if they were remnants? What if Leah was right, and something had been buried in me? A memory, a role, a destiny, and I had been walking around all this time with no idea it was still alive under the surface. And just when I thought I had reached the bottom of this nightmare, another thread was pulled. That night, as I was packing to leave the motel and try to trace Leah's location, I got an email. No message. Just a video file titled The Reawakening. I hesitated before playing it, afraid of what I might see. But curiosity won. The video was grainy, taken in a dimly lit underground room. A circle of figures stood around a stone basin, filled with what looked like water, or something thicker. And then, a woman stepped forward, her face hidden under a veil, holding a child's hand. Ellie. My daughter. But what shattered me was the person standing beside her. Not Leah. Not a stranger. It was Rachel. Alive. And chanting. Smiling. As if she had always belonged there. And she turned to the camera, looked directly into it, and whispered my name. Not in warning, but in invitation. I barely slept that night. I kept the motel room lights on, watching the corners of the room like something might crawl out of them. I couldn't shake the image of Rachel's face in that video, serene, otherworldly, like she wasn't even fully human anymore. Something in her eyes had changed. She wasn't my sister, not anymore. And yet, part of me still needed to believe she was being forced, manipulated, threatened into this madness. That she hadn't just joined it. But deep down, I knew. There was a stillness in her that couldn't be faked. A piece I hadn't seen since we were kids. As if she'd finally found where she belonged, even if it meant betraying everything that tethered her to the life she left behind. And now, she was with my daughter, guiding her, ushering her into something dark, sacred, and irreversible. That thought alone made my stomach turn, but it wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that I was starting to feel like I was the intruder in all this. That somehow I was the outsider, the disruptor of a cycle already in motion. The next morning, I made the call I'd been dreading for days. I drove 2 hours north to a private home on the edge of a dried-up lake bed where my father had been living since his stroke. He wasn't the kind of man who kept in touch. After my mom died, he folded into himself and only resurfaced for birthdays and occasional check-ins. But now I needed him. Not for comfort. For answers. When he opened the door and saw me standing there, disheveled and wild-eyed, his expression didn't register surprise. Only weariness. As if he had been expecting this day for years. I didn't waste time. I held up the photo, the one labeled Samuel, and said, "What is this? Was I part of something? Was Mom?" He looked at the picture for a long time before saying anything. Then he stepped aside and let me in. Inside, the air was thick with incense and something faintly metallic, like old blood or rust. The walls were covered in strange symbols, books in languages I didn't recognize, and newspaper clippings pinned haphazardly to corkboards. My father wasn't just hiding. He was researching, tracking, preparing. He poured himself a drink, something strong, and finally sat across from me. And what he said next changed everything I thought I knew about my own family. He told me our bloodline had been watched for generations, that our lineage carried a certain sensitivity, what some cultures might call sight, others might call vessel potential. My mother, he said, was taken when she was 17 to a sanctuary in the woods, the same one Leah had brought Ellie to. But she escaped pregnant with me and swore to break the cycle. My father helped her run. They erased everything, changed names, relocated, lived small, quiet lives. And for a while it worked. Until Rachel. She was the one who couldn't stay away. Even as a child, she talked about dreams, forests that called to her, people she'd never met whispering her name. My parents thought it was imagination. But when she was 15, she disappeared for a week. Said she'd been found. That they'd told her the truth. She came back different. Obsessed. Cold. My mother tried to bring her back to reality, but it didn't work. Rachel left for good at 17, same age as my mom had been, and no one heard from her again. Until now. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. All these years, I'd lived in the shadows of secrets I didn't even know existed. My own sister was part of the cult, or order, as my father called it, that had nearly claimed my mother. And now they had Ellie, my daughter, the continuation of this damn bloodline they seemed so obsessed with. I asked why he never told me. Why he let me marry Leah if he suspected anything about her. His answer was as heartbreaking as it was useless, because I thought it was over. And because I didn't think you'd believe me. That's when his phone buzzed. A text. From an unknown number. Just one word. Silence. I grabbed the phone from him. Whoever sent it, they knew where we were. They were watching us. That night, I received an envelope slid under my motel door. No postage, no markings. Inside was a flash drive and a note, handwritten in a language I didn't recognize, but one symbol stood out. The same spiral Ellie had drawn. I hesitated, but plugged in the drive. The video showed Leah, sitting in a stone chamber, talking to someone off camera. And then I heard my name. "I'll give him a choice," she said. "Let him bring her himself. Or we'll take him too." The video cut to black. That was the ultimatum. My only options. Deliver my daughter willingly and keep my life, or resist and be swallowed up with her. It was the kind of choice designed to break a man. And maybe that was the point. But what they didn't understand was that this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about burning it all down. I didn't care what price I had to pay. The truth wasn't something I could run from anymore. It had already spread like fire through everything I loved. And as I sat there, heart pounding, I realized something else. They hadn't just taken Ellie. They had been preparing her for years. Maybe longer. And the worst part? I might have helped them without ever knowing it. I left the motel with nothing but the flash drive and a list of names my father gave me. Old contacts from the days when he and my mother were still running, still connected to whatever underground network had helped them escape. I drove 3 hours east to a rundown cabin in the Appalachians, deep into territory where GPS failed and phone signals dropped like stones. The cabin belonged to a woman named Teresa Hale. According to my father, she used to be one of the recruiters before she defected, vanishing after leaking information to someone in law enforcement nearly 2 decades ago. I didn't know if she was still alive, but I had no more cards left to play. When I found her, she was in worse shape than I'd imagined. Gaunt, jittery, paranoid to the point of delusion, but she recognized the spiral the second I showed her. She made me turn off every device I carried, burned sage in the corners of the room, then finally sat down to talk. What she told me didn't sound like a story. It sounded like a war report. This wasn't a retreat. This wasn't some fringe spiritual movement. It was a network, one that extended across state lines, across generations. She called it the lattice. A web of influence embedded in everything from private schools to pediatricians to child welfare organizations. They didn't take children randomly, they selected them, groomed them, conditioned them from a young age for initiation. Some were born into it. Others were chosen through their parents' connections, bloodlines, or psychological profiles. I asked her if Leah was part of it all along. Her answer: asterisk, she was bred for it. Just like your daughter. Asterisk. My stomach sank. Every memory of Ellie's early childhood flickered like a broken reel. Leah's obsession with homeschooling. The strange bedtime rituals I always thought were just new age parenting. The cleansing weekends she took Ellie on every few months. I remembered once coming home early from work and finding them both in a candlelit room, Ellie in a trance-like state, humming a tune I'd never heard before. Leah said it was meditation, that it helped with Ellie's night terrors. I believed her. I believed everything she told me because I wanted to believe I had built a normal family. But I hadn't. I had been living inside a well-designed lie. And worse, I had played along. That night, Teresa gave me coordinates to a secondary site, a fallback location the group used when their main sanctuary came under scrutiny. She warned me not to go alone, that if I showed up, they'd be waiting. I didn't care. I had to end it. But just as I was packing to leave, my phone buzzed. It shouldn't have. I'd turned it off. The screen lit up with a video feed, grainy and pixelated, but unmistakable. It was Ellie, in a white gown, surrounded by people in robes. And standing just behind her was Rachel. Only this time, Rachel didn't look like someone who'd simply joined them. She looked like someone in charge. And then, slowly, someone stepped into frame next to her.
Leah.
She wasn't a pawn. She wasn't manipulated. She was a leader. I felt something fracture in me that moment. All those years of marriage, every kiss goodnight, every morning coffee we shared, it wasn't love. It was surveillance. My own life had been a slow, patient conditioning process. They hadn't just recruited Leah. They'd embedded her in my life. Infiltrated me. I drove through the night. Rage.
Fear. Grief.
None of it mattered anymore. I didn't care if I lived. I just wanted my daughter back. But as I crossed state lines into the dense forest near the coordinates, I noticed something: cars. Parked sporadically along dirt paths. Some were new, others decades old. And the people, families, couples, lone travelers, they were walking into the woods. Willingly. Like pilgrims. They weren't being taken, they were joining. This wasn't about Ellie anymore. This was a movement. A rebirth. A hidden world that had lived beside ours the entire time, invisible only because we never dared to look closely. And I had just stepped straight into the heart of it. Suddenly, my car screeched to a halt. Someone was standing in the middle of the road. It was my father, blood running down his forehead, shaking. "They know," he whispered. "They're inside." And before I could ask what he meant, my car's back doors flew open. They had found me. The forest swallowed sound in a way that felt unnatural. No birdsong, no wind, no rustling of leaves, just the crunch of my boots on damp earth as I followed the last sliver of light from my flashlight, deeper into terrain that felt untouched by time. My father was gone by the time I turned back. Vanished. As if the moment he warned me, his purpose was fulfilled and the woods reclaimed him. I didn't have time to look for him. My daughter's face, blank and hollow on that video feed, haunted every step. I was too far gone to retreat. The coordinates led me to a clearing surrounded by towering black pines, where a tall stone archway stood covered in moss and symbols that pulsed under my flashlight like veins. Beyond the arch was a compound, Wooden structures shaped like cabins, but designed more like shrines, all connected by a circular path lit with glass jars holding flickering candles. I ducked behind a shed as I heard murmurs and footsteps, watching as a procession of followers filed into the central lodge, each wearing identical white linen robes. My heart pounded against my ribs as I scanned the faces. They were all calm, peaceful,
Smiling.
and among them, walking slowly, like she was part of something sacred, was Ellie. I moved before I could think, slipped between buildings, dodged the watchers, and found a back entrance into the central lodge. The air inside smelled of incense and earth. The walls were covered in carvings, spirals, constellations, and images of children with open eyes gazing into stars. At the far end of the room, on an elevated platform, stood Leah. But she wasn't the woman I remembered. She stood tall, poised, with an air of command that silenced the entire room. Her eyes locked onto mine instantly. No shock, no fear, just recognition, like she'd been expecting me. "You made it," she said, her voice echoing through the space. "You were always meant to." I didn't have words. My eyes flicked to Ellie, standing beside her, calm, unmoving, her expression unreadable. I stepped forward, shaking. "What did you do to her?" Leah raised her hand, and two robed figures stepped out from the shadows behind me. I spun around, ready to fight, but they didn't touch me. Instead, they placed a large leather-bound book on the floor at my feet. It was old,
Worn.
and when I opened it, I felt the weight of something ancient press against my mind. Inside were names, symbols, lineages, rituals. But on one page, one seared into my memory, was a family tree. My name, Leah's, and Ellie's, all connected by a symbol I'd first seen on the flash drive. According to the pages, our union wasn't random. It was arranged.
Bread.
Our bloodlines had been curated for generations to produce a child with thin skin, someone who could walk between this world and others. Ellie wasn't just special. She was the culmination of a prophecy. And then the true horror landed. Leah hadn't stolen Ellie. She had returned her to where she belonged. "You thought you were the hero," Leah said softly, walking toward me. "But you were the vessel. You were never meant to keep her. You were meant to deliver her." My hands shook as I reached for Ellie, but she stepped back. Her lips parted. "I remember now," she whispered. "The fire, the singing, the circle in the dark. I belong here." I broke. Everything I'd fought for, every step of this nightmare, had led me to a daughter who no longer recognized me as her father, who had been prepared for this her whole life. My rage turned inward. I dropped to my knees, unable to process the betrayal, the scope of what I'd been manipulated into. And then a voice, different from Leah's, spoke from the shadows. "You were never meant to survive this part." It was Rachel. Her face was harder now, angular and cold. She stepped into the light with a ceremonial dagger in hand, its blade engraved with the same spiral. Leah didn't flinch. Neither did Ellie. But something strange happened. Ellie stepped between us.
"No," she said.
"He came back for me." "That wasn't part of the design." Rachel hesitated. "He's a liability." Ellie turned to Leah. "Then let me decide." Leah nodded once. And in that second, Ellie raised her hand toward me, and the entire room went silent. The walls flickered, like the candlelight bent around her fingers. Time seemed to pause. She whispered something I couldn't hear, and Rachel collapsed. Not dead, but unconscious, her body twitching as if purged of something dark. Ellie looked at me, her eyes glowing faintly. "I remember both lives now. Yours and theirs. I can choose." The room held its breath. "I'm choosing you." Chaos followed. Leah screamed, not in pain, but in rage, and the room shook. The spiral symbols on the wall pulsed wildly, and the followers began to panic, tearing at their robes, some dropping to the ground in seizures. Ellie grabbed my hand. "Run," she said. We tore through the compound as the buildings crumbled behind us, as if her choice had unraveled the foundation of their world. Flames licked the edges of the forest. Shadows darted through trees. I didn't know what was real anymore, what was hallucination, what was spiritual collapse, but I knew this. I had my daughter back. We made it to the car. Drove until the night melted into morning. Neither of us spoke. We didn't have to. But as we crossed the county line, Ellie looked out the window and said softly, "They're not gone. They just lost this round." And from her pocket, she pulled out a page from the book, The Family Tree, with a new name scribbled beneath hers. Not a name I recognized, but a warning. They already found the next one. We didn't go home, not at first. After everything we'd seen, everything that had been done to Ellie, there was no way we could return to the same street, the same neighborhood, pretend like things were normal. We ended up driving for 3 days, following no particular route, stopping only when exhaustion won over fear. Ellie barely spoke, and when she did, her words were measured, precise, like she was still translating thoughts from a language she'd learned in another life. Her eyes had changed, not just metaphorically, but in a way that unnerved me. She wasn't broken or vacant anymore, but hyper-aware, as if she could see something the rest of us couldn't. For a while, I convinced myself it was trauma, that her brain was still recovering from whatever psychological damage Leah and the group had inflicted. But the way streetlights flickered when she passed beneath them, the way animals stayed utterly still when she looked their way, the way her scars never fully healed but instead formed symmetrical patterns across her back, I knew there were some things science couldn't explain. Some things I couldn't fix. Eventually, we found a small, remote house in the Pacific Northwest, surrounded by towering trees and a thick mist that seemed to muffle the world outside. I told people we moved for a job. I left out the part about a bloodline prophecy, a ritual cult in the woods, and the fact that my daughter might be the key to something the world wasn't ready to understand. We lived quietly, off-grid in some ways. No social media, no school enrollment. I homeschooled Ellie with books I trusted. Taught her to build fires, filter water, read the stars, not because I was preparing for doomsday, but because somewhere deep down, I believed this wasn't over. And I needed her to be ready. Still, there were quiet moments, too. Soft ones. We'd cook together. Watch old movies. On some nights, Ellie would fall asleep with her head on my shoulder, breathing steady, like any ordinary kid. I lived for those nights. I'd tuck her in, kiss her forehead, and try to believe that what we escaped hadn't followed us. But truth has a long reach. It doesn't die when you ignore it. Sometimes it just waits. One morning, nearly a year later, Ellie stood at the edge of the woods behind our house, staring into the fog. She didn't move for hours. I watched from the window, uncertain whether I should interrupt. When she finally came back inside, she handed me a smooth stone with a symbol etched into it. I recognized it immediately. It was the same spiral I'd seen in the compound, the one carved into the walls, the same one on the book that Leah had shown me. Only now it was cracked straight down the center. Ellie said nothing, just placed it on the kitchen counter and walked upstairs. That night, I didn't sleep. In the months that followed, strange letters began arriving. No return address, postmarked from towns I'd never heard of. Some were blank. Others contained only numbers or coordinates. I burned every one. I never told Ellie. I couldn't bear to pull her back into the nightmare. But a part of me, the part that knew what we had escaped, also knew that silence didn't mean safety. It meant someone was watching, waiting. I began noticing small things, footprints around our cabin that didn't match our shoes, feathers arranged in odd shapes outside the front door, the smell of sage and ash lingering in the wind after nightfall. I told myself it was paranoia, but I'd lived too much of the unexplainable to ignore signs. Then, about 6 months ago, Ellie started drawing again. At first, it was animals, trees. But slowly, faces began to appear. Faces I didn't recognize. People I'd never met. She drew them over and over again in great detail, eyes always open, mouths always silent. One afternoon, I asked her who they were. She looked up from her sketch pad and said, "I think they're the others. The ones who chose differently." I didn't ask what she meant. I was afraid of the answer. But I knew, then, that she still felt the pull. That no matter how far we'd come, a part of her was still connected to that place, that world behind the veil we'd only glimpsed through smoke and chance and scarred skin. I tried to live normally. We celebrated her birthday. I baked a cake. She smiled. I took a photo. But later that night, when I checked my phone, the photo was gone. In its place was a black image with only a small white spiral in the center. That was the night I accepted the truth. The retreat, the cult, the rituals, they weren't isolated events. They were part of something cyclical, something that resets and resurfaces, generation after generation, always looking for a door. And somehow, Ellie had become one. I didn't know how to protect her from something that existed beyond reason, but I promised myself I would keep trying until my last breath. That was my role now, not the hero, not the vessel, just a father with a daughter the universe refused to leave alone. Now, as I record this, there's one last thing you should know. A week ago, someone knocked on our door. A woman in her 20s, wearing a raincoat, hair soaked from the storm outside. She didn't say who she was. She just handed Ellie a sealed envelope and walked away. Ellie waited until the door was closed, then opened it. Inside was a photo. Not of her, not of me, but of a boy no older than 10, with a spiral scar on his shoulder. And scrawled on the back of the photo in trembling ink were 6 words I still can't get out of my head. Asterisk. She broke the chain too late. Asterisk. So now I ask you, if you've watched this far, if you've felt the weight of this journey, what would you do? If everything you thought was real turned out to be ritual, if your child became part of a prophecy you never believed in, and the world around you kept whispering that it's not over, would you run again? Or would you finally face what's coming? Because I don't think we have a choice. Not anymore.